This is Make Planning Make Sense. I'm Aaron Zimmerman, and I'm a director at Centro. Our guest this week is Jamie Holmes, CEO of Vu.City. Jamie talks through the power of Vu.City as a communication tool. The need for effective communication is a key theme for season 1 of the pod, and it's a key value that we add as planning agents. We also chat about what's next for Vu.City, a bit of comparative politics, and a bit of behavioural sociology. Please be sure to give the podcast a follow on your preferred platform, recommend a favourite episode or two within your professional network, and continue the conversation on our media channels, MPMS Podcast, on Instagram, X, and Blue Sky. Here is our conversation with Jamie Holmes. Jamie Holmes, CEO of Vu.City. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
We always like to start with a little bit about who you are and how you came to your role.
Yeah, good. I guess probably quite an interesting journey. So I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I was in manufacturing for quite a long time, so started by making empty tin cans. So then I thought, I'm not going to be making tin cans for the whole of my life, particularly as my father made tin cans for the whole of his life. So I thought, I'm going to be bold and branch out. So I moved next door and filled tin cans. So I moved to Coca-Cola and worked for Coca-Cola and Schweppes for a few years. Then met my wife. I was living in Milton Keynes at the time. And my wife was very much keen to move to London. So there isn't a great deal of manufacturing in London. So I thought, now's the time to become a consultant. So joined PA Consulting, helping do things like refit programs for, dare I say it, some submarines, a couple of other things, but really got into sort of implementing systems. So wherever there was a sort of computer system that could support efficiencies and everything else. A friend of mine, this was back in sort of 2000, a friend of mine said, let's join this small startup consultancy called Zoomworks. We'll be millionaires in a few years. 16 and a half years later, we weren't millionaires, but we'd had a great time. And so I ended up by sort of running both the consulting side and then ultimately the technology side, where we'd outsourced technology development to Romania and Bulgaria. So loved that whole journey, loved the company. It was all brilliant, but just felt that I had something else to give. And during that time, one of my clients was Savills, and Savills have a venture investment arm called Grosvenor Hill Ventures, and they were looking to invest in this product called Vu.City, and were looking for a sort of independent CEO, and approached me, and that was back in 2017, and I've been at Vu.City ever since.
We've talked on the podcast before about planning as a system. I say regulatory system, you could say art, bureaucracy, science, whatever you want, all of them. It was interesting that you've come to this in a way through your experience with operational systems. And Alex Urigian, a developer who was on the podcast before, said planning is not a complex system, planning is a complicated system. But the built environment, undoubtedly, indisputably, is a complex system.
Yeah.
How do you see Vu.City and your work dealing with some of the complexity and ambiguities of something as imprecise and undefinable as the built environment?
There's a lot to that, isn't there? I mean,
what was your elevator pitch to Savills?
That's an interesting one. I would say my elevator pitch.
Oh, sorry, it's a lift in the UK.
No. We still do refer to the elevator pitch.
A lift prospectus.
Yeah. So the elevator pitch on me. I think, actually, I didn't need to pitch to Savills, because Savills, as a client, I think had seen me sort of support them in a service environment, and I think they liked the way that we provided services to them, and I think they could see therefore that me as an individual was someone who cared very much about our customers and was quite, I think, adaptable and resilient, and was there to solve problems rather than to rush around like a lunatic. And I think, when you're in a startup company, that sort of scrappy but efficient entrepreneurial type environment is exactly what you need. So, yeah. Sorry, going back to the sort of wicked problem, as I would call it. One of my advisors in the past always talked about problems that involve people as being sort of wicked problems. And, I think planning is very much one of those. So I think there's multiple levels. As I said, I think if you look at one side, it's how do you explain something that is inherently multidimensional, when historically all we've had is two-dimensional drawings, or even worse than that, actually just written text. And I'd say that's where Vu.City can come in from a tool. Actually, it's much easier to conceptualize change if you can actually feel it in the dimensions that you live. A good example of that, so within Vu.City, you can actually take bits of the model out and put new bits in. So, for example, if you're an architect, you can actually say, well, this area isn't going to look like this in the future. It does look like that now, but let's take it out and let's put a new proposed scheme into that place. But it also shows the sort of timeline of consents that have already been approved. You can actually see what's coming, and therefore you can actually contextualize a new proposal, not just against what it is now, but actually against what it's already going to look like, because all the rest of the stuff around it has been approved. So we had a really good example the other day. I won't mention which local authority, but the architect and developer went in to see the local authority, and actually they were thinking that they were pushing the extremities of what they could get away with that was viable in that area. And particularly when you sort of imported that building with the planning officer there and actually importing the building, it did look big. But actually, when you turned on all of the area around, and it was sort of recognised as a tall building environment. So when you turned everything that was approved on, it actually looked almost small. And in fact, they agreed that they would add an extra number of units as long as those units were affordable housing. So the developer was a winner, the local authority was a winner, but it was all to do with that context and the fact that you could see it in 3 or almost 4 dimensions in terms of looking forward in time. But I think also, and this is where I think the planners have to play a massive part, I think the planner's role is shifting, or needs to shift perhaps. One of the things that I discovered in my career, one of the things that my early career did, was actually review where you're going to get on in life based on certain traits. And sort of inherent to that was the work by this chap called Elliot Jacks, who I really like because he also coined the term midlife crisis, which I love. I think I've been through it. But his whole view, and this is to do with the workplace, but I think it's just as relevant here, which is people are different. People are very different. And some people, in generally, are able to deal with ambiguous situations and somehow feel clear about what is the right decision, and other people just aren't. And so there's this sort of stratified systems theory, which is called, and it's basically saying some people just, and the way to measure it is really about how long does it take for the result of the decision that I make to actually show to be right or wrong. So, you know, someone like a factory worker who sees a whole load of broken cans coming out of a machine can hit the stop button and instantly they kind of know that was the right decision, I've stopped it. Whereas you could be the CEO of a large multinational saying, should we be going into China? And you're not going to know if it's the right result for 20, 30 years. That's an inherent thing that you're born with and you can't change it. All you can do is sort of build up your experience and your knowledge and everything else to grow into that role. But if you apply that to the general citizen and you recognise that of these sort of 5 levels, level 1 being the decision I take is seen tomorrow, level 5 is the decision I take is seen in 20, 30 years' time, and you recognise that the majority of the people on this planet are a level 1, level 2, so they're expecting to see results sort of in 2 to 3 weeks. So they're not about ambiguous situations, they're about simple, straightforward situations. So we've got this challenge where planners are trying to put forward a 20-year vision of a location, particularly with all some of the stuff we're dealing with now about climate change and, well, there's just so much of sort of complexity, as you talked about earlier on, Aaron, that you've got to try and explain that story to this level 5 level, but really you're explaining it to people who really only care about what's going on in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So they, you know, understandably, they care about, you know, the car parking spaces or the local school investment, or are we going to get a new pharmacy, all of this sort of stuff. And the planners are trying to talk about, you know, we're delivering climate change in 20 years' time. So I think the planner's role is to actually sort of be the translator of that, to actually try and think about how can I tell a story that is a big, huge, chunky story about what we're trying to do in the next 20 years, but actually also then translate that and relate that to, and what does that mean for you, and why is the parking in your street actually part of the 20-year plan, and try and convince people that they understand the importance of doing something much bigger whilst also recognising the stuff that needs to be done tomorrow. Gosh, that was a long answer, sorry.
No, it was brilliant. That reminds me a bit of what we've heard from other professionals on the podcast, that when you have an agent, or a planning officer who, air quotes, gets it, then your life is a lot easier. Your work is more productive and you get to see the results of what you've been doing. The discretionary system almost assumes that the planners who are operating on a case-by-case basis are philosopher kings, that they're able to take embodied carbon on one hand, housing delivery on the other, flood risk reduction downstream, etc., and say, all right, hang on, I'm just going to really work to understand this in the round. and come to a planning balance.
Yep.
And if all of the officers and agents were philosopher kings, then the planning system as designed in 1947 would be smashing, right?
Yeah.
But we also understand, of course, that it doesn't result in anything like what the local plan envisages for those next 20 years, and it doesn't deliver the housing that the society needs. It's not a flippant question, but like, how would we get more level 5s into planning?
Someone said when you go into a school, you still hear a lot of the youngsters sort of talking about, when I grow up, I want to be a train driver. Interestingly, I wanted to be a forklift truck driver, but I don't know if that's just because I worked in factories. But you don't really hear too many kids saying, when I grow up, I want to be a planner. And yet, an amazing job it is.
I know, right?
Yeah. I mean, what other job gives you that ability to shape the very place that you're living in and make it better for everybody? I mean, surely that's got to be good, hasn't it? But yeah, it seems to not be resonating with the youth. So I think a lot more education about the greatness of planning and what it can actually do, and the opportunities that you get at a fairly young junior level to actually input into the shaping of our places, definitely.
I think one of the really exciting parts about being a planner as well gets to your point, Jamie, about being in between expertise and being communicative.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, to your point about ambiguity, I think there is a great deal of ambiguity, and Aaron, as you said, complexity. But at the same time, it's not like we don't have the information and the evidence available. And there's such a challenge in how we can present that and communicate that well.
Yeah, this is where I would like to think that tools like Vu.City can help, because trying to be able to present data in a way that's easier to consume, particularly if you're sitting there as a level 5 thinking about the 20 year, but actually you wanted to pitch it to show these lower level changes and how they actually link back to the level 5. So I think tools like Vu.City can help, and we're rebuilding the platform at the moment to allow it to be much more around data. So much more around, I'm going to load some data in, and I'm going to create a compelling way of telling that story about this particular piece of data so that it's not ambiguous. It is pretty clear what actually that means. It's in the dimensions that people can experience and feel it. But it is still, it's just a tool. The real thing, going back to your point, is it's having the time to actually think, what's more important than telling this story to actually get everybody on side, which ultimately, in the long run, will hopefully deliver the long-term plan that we always wanted to achieve, rather than we end up getting locked into chipping away at those sort of the objections that are rightful objections if people can't relate what's happening to my parking. That's where you end up spending all your time, is getting over those things that were put in place for the right reasons. Again, all of the rules around tree protection orders, for example, they're all the right things, but you end up using a TPO as the excuse for not doing something that actually isn't because people want to protect the tree. It's because it's the only bit of legislation that they can latch onto that will stop that change from happening.
No, absolutely. We've seen Vu.City be very helpful in telling that visual narrative in an application, and it saves time. So instead of needing to say, of course, an elevation drawing isn't going to be read as such in the built environment, if you have to imagine what the setback is going to do, so when you're looking at the building from eye level, it'll be imperceptible or barely perceptible. If you can just show them the eye level view and say, look, the top floors aren't perceptible when you're near the building, that saves an incredible amount of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it feels fair as well, because it's, you're sitting there with that person doing it in real time. It doesn't feel like you're trying to hide it. It feels like you're basically saying, let's go to those places, let's have a look, let's have a think about it, and sort of sharing that problem rather than confronting an objection.
Yeah, and when we work with architects on preparing an application, one of the sort of key notes that we always have for the architect, and when you have a great architect, it's fantastic, is we have to show that narrative. We have to show that we've thought about it rather than rely on the officer to understand what the submitted materials are and deduce that for themselves. But we also run into siloed thinking in terms of losing sight of that strategic vision. So maybe there's room for 16 cycle parking spaces, but the policy compliant number is 18. There's often a difficulty in connecting what we're assessing on paper at the moment and what that outcome is going to be. It's sort of like, well, 16 is fewer than 18. How do you see Vu.City overcoming that?
Ask me in a year's time, because I'm sure we'll have loads of examples in time. But we're in the process, as I said, of updating Vu.City to be much more around helping people tell more stories about data, because at the moment the platform's not that easy to actually load your data, manipulate it to tell the right story. But I think what we're trying to do with that data is to sort of make it understandable. For example, if you're talking about pollution or you're talking about wind, is how could we visually show that in the platform that makes it clearer to understand? So for example, if as part of the planning assessment you were saying, actually, this will increase footfall in this area by 20%. What does that mean? That's such an abstract concept. Whereas if you can say, this is the footfall before the change, this is the footfall after the change, can you even perceive a difference? Answer, no. Then actually people kind of get it.
Often we're in situations where we're working with an officer and we're sort of saying, yeah, but obviously that just wouldn't be an issue. But of course, they're also looking at the same 45 considerations we are, and they're afraid of JR risk, and they're trying to deal with perhaps twice as many cases as an agent might have. And we've found that everything needs to be evidenced. If there's a question, instead of being like, that's a dumb question, you have to actually instead say, here's the evidence. Yeah. Because Alex, to your point, they don't always have the opportunity to reason through it with us. They just need it in the planning record. Peace of mind, boop, done. When you say data, though, for this sort of next step of Vu.City, what sort of data are we discussing?
It's a very good point. I would like to think whatever data you think you want to throw at it, but that's, I know that's not true, and I know that we need to think through all of that. But theoretically, any piece of information that is geo-referenced in space, and a proper space, so all 3 dimensions as opposed to a pretend vertical dimension, but also a time-based element to that. So that's where we snuck in our 4D.
I was going to say.
Yeah, got to have the time. And that could be very slow change, like a timeline for all of the consented schemes that come in, are approved, that are then under construction, that are then topped out and finished, all the way through to something that is almost microsecond, is the movement of wind for a minute's simulation. That's sort of conceptually what we want to try and do. But I think also within that is there's then wonderful opportunities to make that more engaging. For flood risk, let's actually show the water coming in. Let's show it, lapping up against, your doorstep and all that kind of stuff. Because again, it's it's emotions. People engage with that stuff. It's storytelling.
So this is what a 300 mil floodwater line would look like.
Yeah. And I think that ability to communicate, visualize, right? I mean, we have to communicate to members of the public, lay people, but also between the silos, as we were discussing, because otherwise you're left in a situation where the consultant is communicating via the agent with the consultee at the local authority. And then, everybody is just contained within their silos. And when you have something that brings it together, right, it's just a moment where I think it breaks through those silos between experts and between experts and members of the public.
I'm sorry. No, I completely agree.
Yeah, I completely agree. That whole point, even the experts disagree.
Yeah.
So how do you expect the layperson, therefore, to hop on the journey and agree when there is no agreement in the first place? The more we can get people on looking at the same data, experiencing the same information, coming to, therefore, the same conclusion would be amazing. I mean, it's all utopia. We're never, as I said, this is a wicked problem. It's people. It's always going to be a challenge, but what's lovely, I think, is that people... I think 7 years ago when I joined Vu.City, or 8 years ago, the whole concept of sort of data storytelling and everything else, it felt like it was a new thing. We're all storytellers, this is the way to engage and what have you. I think it's such a common thing now. I think the more people acknowledge the fact that it's so important to tell these stories in an engaging way to get people on board, that's a great thing.
We'll be right back. What's preventing us from being able to go more into this communicative visualization sort of trajectory?
I think it comes back to your question to me, Aaron, earlier on, which is how do we get more level 5 planners into the system? I don't think we've got enough level 5 planners. So if you've got a level 2 planner, the level 2 planner wants to see the parking and the trees and the this, that and the other, because they can't do the 20-year vision. It's too big for them. So if you've got a local planner who is only interested in ticking the boxes of legislation, then there's no need to tell big picture stories because there's never a big picture story in the first place.
We've talked on the podcast before about a reactive governance and a proactive governance. And we've talked before how a reactive governance system is taking information, reacting to it. It's the 16 is fewer than 18 though, right? And then a proactive system is saying, this is our end goal. We need to get to that end goal. How can we get there? And if we're not getting there with the current system, then we need to change it, right? We would also need to have consensus on what the desired outcome is. How would you define the public benefit or even the purpose of planning?
Gosh, this one where I have to take a moment.
What is good or evil to you, Jamie?
Oh, is that the same question, just posed in a different way?
I'm just trying to help.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about what a job well done looks like in planning, what does a job well done look like to you?
Okay. Without sort of getting into the high levels of what is planning, perhaps come back to what are we trying to achieve here, which is the delivery of a bigger change than perhaps we're seeing at the moment. But one where everybody feels like they've been treated fairly in that process. I would certainly say at the moment, people don't feel like the system is fair. That's probably a fair assumption as well. But I think it's a big challenge there to make it feel fair. I mean, I think there's some really, really good examples of delivering significant change in a fair way. I mean, King's Cross is sort of held up as being sort of one of those ways where a massive change was delivered over a relatively long period of time. It was a very complex change, and yet everybody, I think, throughout the process and the end product, everyone has felt, I think, like they've been treated fairly. Lots of engagement, lots of demonstration that the voice of the citizen had been listened to. Continuous sort of messaging from the very big, this is the end goal, but tomorrow this is what we're going to be doing. This is where I'll probably sneak in my next reference. So there's a chap called Tom Tyler who's done quite a lot of work, or did quite a lot of work, I think, on what he calls procedural justice or the fairness principle, which is people are willing to accept a decision, even if it's not in their best interests, if they feel that the process by which that decision was made was fair. And there's absolutely no way that we're always ever going to please everybody. But if you can demonstrate that the process was fair, then actually everybody feels accepting of the outcome. And I think that's what we need to do. And I think that is about common data. So everybody's looking at the same data. I think it is about treating people with respect. Again, going back from that level 5 to the level 2. You know, it's not about NIMBYism and all this kind of stuff. People genuinely do care about what it's going to look like tomorrow. And some people cannot see what it's going to look like in 20 years. So deal with the tomorrow things. People will feel that it's fair. So common data, dignity with all of the people that are being used, and a very transparent and clear process by which decisions are made. And I'd like to think Vu.City is merely a tool that can help in that process.
Do you think that a process-based planning system, the purpose of which is a fair process, is at odds with a delivery-based planning system, the outcome of which is delivery of particular objectives, like 1.5 million new homes?
But isn't that part of the whole big story? Perhaps that's where we're missing a point at the moment. I mean, depending on which dinner party I'm sitting down at, you talk about that delivery of 1.5 million homes, and some people will come back and say, I don't think that's even enough. We should be delivering more. Other people will come back and say, oh, well, if you drive through Nine Elms at the moment, on a night, none of the lights are on because it's all bought by overseas investors. No one's actually living in them. We need to be doing something around all of this. Rather, the whole 1.5 million homes, I don't think has been explained well enough for everybody consistently to go, oh my God, we really do need 1.5 million homes. Let's all take that seriously. That's part of our 50-year story. That's for the very central government to be saying, this is why we need the 1.5 million. And I'm sure they would probably say they have explained it somewhere. But the fact that we're all nodding around this table now going, yes, they need to do that, means that that's probably buried in paperwork and not visual and not easy to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before 1947, before our Planning Act, we were delivering a lot of homes. We built a heck of a lot of homes, but we didn't do it through the process that we have today. you could say like there's a bit of a conflict there between you have a system that's optimized for delivery and we didn't follow the best process, the most fair process, the most environmentally conscious process to get there. But hey, look at what we achieved, right? Whereas, wow, we really did every single consultation that we could do. We did, the process was so fair, but what's the outcome of it? Yeah. What did we achieve?
Do you not think that we can have an efficient, fair process? I guess maybe that's what I'm after.
I do.
That's the holy grail.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I would imagine probably 95% of people in London live in houses that, were built sort of in the last century, and amazing. And again, I'm quoting data that I suspect is probably not even true, but I heard the other day, I think it was in the time it took for us to consult and approve on Heathrow's third runway, China had built 100 airports or something like that. It's that whole kind of, if you can just push things through, regardless of a fair process, because we just need to get it done. So I think both are wrong. Yeah. The answer's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. China seems to take that sort of philosopher king approach to the nationwide extreme. Trust us. Yeah. We're going to do this for the benefit of the people. Yeah. Your 5-generation family farm is gone. Yeah. And that's not right. But also not being able to build a road tunnel or a rail tunnel or whatever without so much of that cost and time going toward a procedure where there are more off-ramps and dead ends and tax on the road than there are opportunities to get to where you're going. Yeah. It's a terrible dichotomy. And I agree. I don't think that either is correct. I think if China is towards the extreme of one example, the UK is probably toward the extreme of the other.
I would have thought so. Yeah.
How do you see Vu.City helping to solve the procedural problem that we face?
Vu.City is just a tool. And I think it sits very much in your point earlier around, getting more big thinking people into planning that could then use Vu.City in a more creative and wonderful storytelling way to tell the right story. So I'd like to think that Vu.City, in fact, digital twins in general, and I'm not going to talk about Vu.City, therefore, I'm talking about digital twins. I think digital twins are a fantastic tool. If you think about, for example, digital twins in the early years used in car design and stuff like that, the speed at which people can iterate on a design if it is a digital solution.
Can you develop this idea of the digital twin a little bit more?
I just think the concept of putting something in front of all of the interested parties with a story already in it. I don't just give people a blank sheet of paper, because your average person is going to be saying, you need to tell me what's right. Don't ask me to start from square one. I've got a good example about that, but I won't digress. No, I will digress, actually.
We're all ears.
Yeah. No, so
that's what we're here for.
So I think that whole, going back to the ambiguity thing, Brexit is a fantastic example of this sort of ambiguity thing and how clever people played that Elliot Jack stuff so well, because Brexit is a 50, 100-year problem. Is it right that we should be or shouldn't be part of Europe? But we're not going to generally know what the right thing was, and there is no right. You'll see it more right and more wrong one way, and I'll see it more right, more wrong. That's the whole reason about ambiguity. What's very interesting there is you could see that people, general public, were saying, why can't the politicians just tell us what the right thing to vote for is here? That's because that is your average level 2 person going, well, it can't be that ambiguous. It's got to be right or it's got to be wrong, within 2 or 3 weeks. Why does it take 50 years? So that's why people were getting really angry. But what's also quite interesting in all of that lot is if you knit together the two things that I've been talking about, if you knit together then the whole fair process stuff, what was really clever was that the Brexiteers had picked up on the process of being part of Brexit being unfair. It's all these decisions that are being made in Brussels and we can't control them and everything. Let's take the control back into London, into the UK. And that really resonated with a lot of people, as the process of us being in Europe is unfair. Whereas the Remainers were all talking about the very specific things that we are going to get if we remain within Europe. But the Brexiteers were saying, well, that regardless, doesn't matter about those things because the process is unfair. That's the much bigger thing. Let's take back control. And that just showed, didn't it? The process element was more powerful than the specifics of being part of Europe or not. Yeah.
No, that's a really interesting way to put it.
There's such a parallel there as well to housing delivery, because you have things that are on paper over a long span of time going to really impact the affordability of housing for people. It makes such be material to people's lives. But then on a day-to-day basis, actually on a planning application, what you see is how the building looks, what the extra massing on it is, the things that you can visibly see versus like, oh, but these are your housing delivery numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So you're arguing about attributes rather than you're arguing about something that's ultimately delivering a fairer society. Everything's better, but not many people can connect that, because why would they when they haven't ever been shown?
Do you think that there's a responsibility there of authority and expertise? Because you're talking about the alignment between populism and this procedural aspect. Is there a responsibility there of our experts?
It's a communication point,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a messaging thing.
Yeah.
It is, but that again, if you've got someone in position and they're going to be voted out in 3, 4, 5 years, they focus on the populism, quite rightly so. That's what wins votes. And again, going back to the China thing, they don't care about that, do they? It's like they're in and they're in to stay. So they can make these big, long-term things. And actually, they've got the time. Going back to your point about trust us, we know what's right for you as a citizen. We're just going to go and do it. At least they've got the time then to get to 20 years hence and go, we were right. Look at all these things that we've done. Whereas, within 5 years, different government, different elected leaders, they've got a great opportunity, if things aren't quite looking how they could be, to say, well, actually, this is the wrong direction. Lo and behold, we change direction and we never go anywhere.
And with enough
we're getting deep here, aren't we? Sorry.
I know. Yeah. With enough of a longitudinal sort of perspective, that same Chinese Communist Party government got it wrong a lot until they started to get it right.
Yeah.
And in the time that they needed to hold space for themselves to eventually get it right, they also used just incredible coercive violence and force.
Yeah.
So we don't want that.
No, I'm definitely not saying we want that, but there are some elements that are that opportunity to be able to ride out a theory, to demonstrate that the theory was right. That's a great opportunity.
Yeah. In the UK context, I want to give a shout out to Peter Murray from New London Architecture, who was on the podcast. And he said, that's part of the trouble, isn't it? The time between elections and the political cycle relative to the time it takes to deliver stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the way he said stuff is just like anything.
Yeah.
In our sector, for sure.
Yeah. But you're right. It's anything. It's not just our sector. It is,
Yeah. But I think it comes back to, what do we want, right? And defining the public interest is not that easy. Defining public benefit is not that easy. Defining what is the purpose of planning is not that easy. But that's just so critical, isn't it?
Yeah, I think maybe some of the stuff that I've said today all sounds quite simple and straightforward, I know. But let's start by at least saying, for example, if we could say this 1.5 million homes that we need to deliver is irrefutable for these reasons, and we can get everybody believing and agreeing in that. Stuff like that hopefully then will transition to a new government and remain as an irrefutable fact. So hopefully we can keep focused on delivering 1.5 million new homes, because we all believe in it, and it's not going to become a vote winner to say, actually, we only need to win 800,000, so vote for us. It's consistent across all parties. We need to deliver 1.5 million homes. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be a start?
It would be a political consensus that would let us then, in the built environment sector, begin to work toward an outcome.
Exactly.
I think that's a good place to stop for today. Jamie Holmes of Vu.City, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Make Planning Make Sense. Please do give the show a follow, and please share the show to keep the conversation going and the community growing. Find us on Instagram, X, and Blue Sky at MPMS Podcast, or write to us at podcast@centroplan.co.uk. Make Planning Make Sense is presented by Centro Planning Consultancy and recorded in beautiful London, England. Its executive producer is me, Aaron Zimmerman. Additional production by my colleague and co-host, Alex Roth. Marketing and promotion by our colleague, Reese Raymond. Graphic design by our colleague, Mariam Malaxi. Music by Joseph McDade. From all of us here at Centro, thanks again for listening.